Hi, this is Gila. So I wasn't actually planning to make another video until after my family visit to Britain, but I spent some of this morning actually working on writing what turned into a rather long comment, and I decided to turn it into a video. Now, I have probably said some of this before in some of my previous videos, and there are other people such as the apostate prophet in particular who have far greater in-depth knowledge than I, and who have spoken about such things as well, and they're worth checking out. But I wanted today to talk just a little bit about anti-Semitism, especially in fundamentalist Islamic political ideology, as written in the Quran and Hadith. And of course, it's in the context of the British general election and the vile racism growing in the Labour Party, thanks especially to pandering to the growing influence of the Muslim minority in Britain, still a minority, only about 8%, to get their votes. And Corbyn's appalling support of, frankly, evil anti-Semitic terrorists. Tragically, anti-Semitism has been part of Islamic mainstream ideology since the time of Mohammed, when he realized that the Jewish tribes he knew were never going to accept him as any kind of prophet. Why should they? Jews have their own long-cherished traditions and own holy book, which is far, far older and therefore far more authentic, surely. But he turned against them and the Christian tribes he knew, and basically expelled non-Muslims from Arabia and murdered various others, in particular the Banu Qurayza tribe. Some dreadful details given in the Hadith about how he and his early followers murdered all the men down to boys who were only just beginning the very beginnings of puberty. And the women and girls were taken as sex slaves and, of course, raped the same night, including one lady who became a concubine of Mohammed's. Now, if you look at the Quran, Jews are supposedly descendants of apes and pigs, especially those who don't believe in Judaism anymore. You can look at Quran 265, 560, 7166. They are cursed. For instance, see Quran 288, 446, 513, 564, and 578. Treacherous, Quran 513. Disgraced, Quran 541. They make mischief, Quran 564, 17:4. They are evil, see Quran 580, and violent in enmity to Muslims, see 582, and they were even unjust to themselves, see Quran 16, verse 118. Now, overall, the Hadith, I believe, is even worse than the Quran in its anti-Semitism, especially the appalling verse of, "The hour will not begin until you fight the Jews, until a Jew will hide behind a rock or a tree, and the rock or tree will say, 'O Muslim, O slave of Allah, here is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him.'" Ever wondered how, or rather why, whatever Israel offers, Muslims will not make peace with Israel? So, now, of course there are more peaceful Muslims. There are some Muslims who probably aren't even aware of some of the darker verses of their holy writings, and there are more peaceful ones who try to reinterpret all the unpleasant verses to mean something other than what they actually say. But there's a real fundamental ideological problem here, because the Quran is supposedly the divinely inspired will of the creator of us all. It's the final revelation, apparently. And under Islamic rule for many centuries, Jews and Christians were deliberately humiliated third-class dhimmis, with far fewer rights than Muslims and with no chance of any justice against a Muslim in a court of law. And this whole appalling system was based ultimately on verse 929 in the Quran. Of course, Jews didn't have a very good time under Christians at this time either. They probably had an even worse time, but this is institutionalized in the actual writings of the Quran and Hadith. And if you have the time and money, do check out the excellent book, The Legacy of Islamic Antisemitism. It's edited by Andrew G. Bostom. For instance, there's a quote there from the very renowned 12th century sage and doctor Maimonides. He was actually the personal physician to Saladin himself, and he's quoted as writing, "The nation of Ishmael, that is, Muslims, persecute us severely and devise ways to harm us and to debase us. We have done as our sages of blessed memory instructed us, bearing the lies and absurdities of Ishmael. We listen but remain silent. The more we suffer and choose to conciliate them, the more they choose to act belligerently towards us." And that comes from the Epistle to the Jews of Yemen, written in 1172. Now, this being a fundamental problem that can affect us all as non-Muslims, all of those who are, which is the vast majority of the people of Britain, if all Muslim imams and the British Council of Muslims in Britain cannot bring themselves to disavow publicly and clearly all the hateful and bigoted verses towards non-Muslims in the Quran and Hadith, which are totally against British values of equality, decency, and equal respect under the law for all, irrespective of differences, then we have to think, what should we do? There should surely be a real question as to whether Muslim mosques and madrasas should continue to be tolerated in Britain if these appalling verses are not publicly and clearly disavowed by Muslim leaders. If they can't disavow these verses, then surely no more practicing Muslims should be allowed to immigrate, and any Muslim publicly inciting violence against non-Muslims should be deported and stripped of their citizenship. And even more so, anyone actually committing a terrorist act who actually survives it. Now, I know that sounds deeply drastic and against the long history of respect and tolerance in Britain for all people who've made their home here. But Islam is not just a religion. If it were amongst the lines of Christianity, Judaism, or any other mainstream religion, there'd be no problem. It's a political ideology as vile, supremacist, and bigoted as Nazism. Indeed, Hitler admired the political side of Islam accordingly. Now ask yourselves the question, would we knowingly allow active racist Nazis inciting violence against all non-Aryans, all non-white people, Jews, black people, any minority? Would we allow it to continue to flourish here? Would we? What's the real difference, ultimately? And of course, in cowardly Britain, sadly, I fear any such measures to damp down on madrasas, I can't say the word properly, madrasas and mosques, if, and I repeat, if these intolerant and totally unacceptable verses in the Quran and Hadith inciting violence against non-Muslims are not publicly disavowed and stood up against by British imams, all British imams. I fear any such measures, if they ever happen, will be far too little and far too late. Already many French Jews have moved to Israel, and more British Jews are likely to do so for exactly the same reasons. Growing racist anti-Semitism. It's racism. Thanks to a growing Muslim population and a complete refusal by British authorities and mainstream media even to acknowledge, let alone condemn, the totally unacceptable, hateful and bigoted parts of Islamic political ideology towards all non-adherents, especially Jews. That's why the chief rabbi has spoken up against the anti-Semitism in Labour. That's why even the Archbishop of Canterbury has done so. And that's why all good, moral, good-thinking people who care about freedom and human rights for everyone, irrespective of differences, including good people who are Muslims, need to stand up now and say, enough is enough. We will not tolerate such hatefulness and bigotry in 21st century Britain any longer. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day, have a good week. I'm really looking forward to seeing my family next week. Sadly, there is a reason I'm actually coming to a funeral of an elderly aunt of mine, but it will still be good to catch up with my family, who I see far too rarely. Thank you. All the best. Goodbye.